recording. There we are. Hello and welcome back to the Starving Artist podcast. Thank you for returning. And I am delighted to be here this week with the wonderful Michael Defilippis, live from Brooklyn. How are we doing, buddy?
Hey, Dan, it's great to be with you, man.
Yeah. How are you, man? You were saying you're starting to find a bit of serenity and calm after a bit of a storm.
Yes, absolutely. I'm feeling yeah, just as you said, like it was a crazy month and a half for a lot of reasons,
Hmm.
professionally, personally, just lots of things going on. So I've been feeling in this past week like the plane is landing a bit. So
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the as always, the storms give you appreciation for these moments, and ultimately every time I come through one, even though in the moment I'm kind of feeling like oh man, something must be going wrong,
Yeah.
as soon as it lands I see, oh, that was all a part of some learning that was going on. So
It's so true. It's always, I think there's 2 points there is that kind of you need the light and the dark. You need the dark in order to be able to appreciate the light when it's around. But also, I think, and I've said this on the podcast so many times, people will be tired of it. But I feel like every time you come out of one of those periods of difficulty, challenge, depression, whatever you're going through, it's kind of like a little bit of the egos being chipped off each time.
absolutely.
And I think that's so important. And I'm nowhere near where I need to be yet. But every time it's like a little bit more surrender. And I think surrender in a good way, kind of thing.
No, I so agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk to you. Talk me through your journey after, pardon me, after graduating LAMDA. So you moved to New York from LAMDA, right?
Yeah, I moved.
And sorry, say that again.
I moved straight to
Yeah,
New York.
straight to New York. Um, and then talk me through what happened because Mikey has an incredible story that I know some of the details, I don't know the full details, and I cannot wait to hear about it.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to share it, and also thrilled to get to share it with you because Dan, I know you have a deep appreciation for um, sort of the uncommon journeys in life,
Mhm.
and so these journeys related to what mine is, which has a strong spiritual theme to it, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, so I'm really grateful for this opportunity. It's
Thank you for coming on, man. Honestly, it's a joy to speak to you. And I feel like we had before you get going, we had a conversation while I was in New York. I was just out in New York, and it was really late at night, and I just got back in. But I think we chatted for like half an hour, and we were like, we need to go to bed because otherwise this conversation is going to go on for about 3 hours, which is
here we
always a yeah. And so here we are. Let's do it. Let's get into it.
That's wow. Yeah, it's and even before, when you were messaging me about getting ready for today, you were like, we might focus more on the spiritual aspects of things than the artistic, but it's interesting, and I'm excited to be here on this podcast with you because so much of my spiritual journey, I think, is wrapped into a lot of my artistic life. So
Hmm.
um it's a story I'm excited to share.
Yeah.
And I hope some parts of it may be useful for some people to hear. But so I moved to New York um, straight after LAMDA. After we did our showcase, I had a bit of a time kind of gallivanting around Spain for a bit. Before
Yeah.
it's lovely, and that's a story of its own. But I came to New York, and the mentality that I had when I got here was like it was like being let out of a cage, and it was just total focus, one pointedness on my career as an actor.
Hmm.
And I mean, it was like relentless within myself. Externally, I was it was like I was here for a purpose, and it speaks a lot to my approach to my training when I was at LAMDA. I really, when I was there, my life as an actor was my primary identity.
Same.
And
Yeah,
you know,
I can totally relate to that. Yeah.
It was like that was it, and at the time when I was inside of that, that was all I could see. It was my purpose. It was the reason I was here alive. And when you're at a place like a drama school where you're getting to live that 24/7, you know, I was just able to fully meet myself as Mikey the actor.
Mm.
And I had, it was glorious in so many ways. It was just like this pool, you know. But I came to New York, and it was like these, 5 years from the time I really decided that I wanted to pursue this as my career and as my life's work. I came to New York, and it was like this period of potential, this 5 years of getting ready for the thing. It was like all of a sudden it was here. So I was, yeah, I came in with just on a mission. And I mean, I even remember, I wasn't dating, I wasn't doing, I was like, I'm just here to focus on
Hyper
this.
focused. Yeah.
And um, yeah, so I came in like that, and I had some reps after showcase, and I was doing the auditioning. I was making my own work, things like that. I moved here in November of 2019. And as we all know, March 2020,
Mm-hmm.
everything
The world shut down for a little bit.
shut down. And it's funny, I was next up for my first in-person theater audition in New York for Shakespeare in the Park. And
Oh,
I got
wow.
and I got an email on my phone, and it said, clean up. And I worked on Broadway as a security guard, which was a hell of a job. But I at Harry Potter, and so I would guard other actors while they were signing autographs. Which, when you talk about a knock to the ego, it's
Yeah, yeah.
was
Yeah,
wonderful.
I worked at theaters too. It'll do that. Kind of makes you feel like you're looking through a glass window at the life you
Yeah,
want and can't quite reach in.
it was a special experience. But I got an email just before I went in the room for the audition that said, "Clear out your lockers. Broadway has just been shut down indefinitely." I get this email as I'm walking in the room, literally,
Mm,
to do this audition, and they say, "Oh, so how are you?" And first thing that came out of my mouth was, "I just lost my job."
mm,
And it was just such a surreal moment. Um, this thing that, being faced with this thing that you've been so excited about, been desiring for so long, and it's like, none of us knew the journey that was about to go down. But I came to New York. I'm on this mission. I'm so focused to the point where I can't see the damage it's doing to myself, and the strain it's putting on my friendships. And I may be being a bit harsh in this moment on myself, but um, yeah, there just wasn't much room for a lot else. And then 4 months later, just as things are starting to rev up, it's like nothing. And the thing that I was really surprised by was that as soon as everything shut down, I felt the most enormous sense of relief, more than I like, more than the relief that would have come if I had booked a big job or gotten something that I was excited about. I mean, the fact that I couldn't act, and that my pressure I was putting on myself of making it couldn't exist even if I wanted it to, it like made me happier than I could have ever imagined.
yeah. I know you're not alone in that as well. I've spoken to a number of actors who felt during that time that everyone was in the same boat, from Tom Cruise to little old us. you know?
Exactly.
So I can't be a failure right now. There's no
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
And it's kind of it's amazing and heartbreaking and insightful to me that like that is the reaction, because when you really love something purely in a way that's healthy, I think having the opportunity to practice it taken away is sad and heartbreaking and difficult, which it also was for myself and for many people. But feeling the sense of relief, I was like, wow, I can't ignore this.
Mm.
This is telling me something pretty important and significant about the way that I was going about my life. So I started to sit with that, and I was living with two of our other friends, Scott Gordon and Noah Anderson, and two brilliant actors and beautiful human beings who I owe a lot to in my life. But I was living with them and our friend Caitlin, and we just stayed up all night playing board games and drinking wine, and I just for the first time I felt like this sense of freedom, because I didn't have this pressure of you need to be working on your craft, you need to be getting better, you need to be making it. Um, and yeah, I started to sit with that and was wondering, okay, what is this telling me? And I started to see that the pace that I was going at was completely unsustainable. And I began to feel this difference between sort of like a beautiful effort and an anxious effort. And I could feel just how much of my work was coming from this anxiety, this subconscious, subtle anxiety of, man, if I don't make it, if I don't book the job, if I don't get this thing as soon as I can, then, I'll have failed in a way that, but not like the usual sense of failure we talk about as actors, the good failure, the big failure. I'll have
yeah
I'll have missed the boat, I'll have dropped the ball,
mm-hmm.
whatever those metaphors that
Goes from I have failed to I am a failure in my case. Yeah,
exactly. It goes into I am a failure. Yeah, so having that pressure taken off was very eye-opening. So it's about April now, mid-April, and or early April, about 3 weeks in the pandemic, and our sleep schedules have been so fucked up from staying up all night, not having anything to do, and going to bed at 5 in the morning and playing a lot of Settlers of Catan, that I I was having trouble falling asleep. And my roommate Noah uh, said, "Well, why don't you try smoking a little weed? It might help you fall asleep." And so I'm sober in my life now, and I have been for a long time. I just by choice, I never really drank, and I never really uh, smoked
was
or
that
anything.
was that even at LAMDA as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was. It's strange, growing up in Chicago. It's a bit of a sidebar. I'm from Chicago, but like, you grow up in the city. We all started smoking and drinking when we were like 12 years old. You know what I mean? And so by the time I was 14, I joke I quit smoking cigarettes. But I don't know what, throughout high school, and I just kind of had this sense, I have addiction in my family, and I yeah, it was this kind of road of I didn't really want to get into it, because part of me one wanted to maintain this like opportunity to find my excitement and my fulfillment in life without the use of substances, without depending on a foreign substance, and then also because I'd seen people go down the road of dependency on drugs and alcohol, and something in me was steering me from it.
Yeah.
And knowing myself, you know what I mean? Like the things that I love doing and the things that are my indulgences, I can get really wrapped up in. So I think it was a self-preservation thing. And, but yeah, I would drink here and there, but it was pretty much sober for my life. through LAMDA and into New York. I mentioned, drinking wine every now and then, but yeah. And so then when my friend offered that I smoke something, there was part of this like, oh, maybe this will be good, maybe, I don't know, but I decided I'd try it out, out of excitement, and out of this sort of curiosity. I was in a place where so much was up in the air. I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. Maybe it'll help me sleep. So I did, and 6 hours later, I'm wide awake, having the most beautiful trip ever.
Right.
And this is something that happens sometimes with marijuana. People do have psychedelic experiences, and yeah, I think my sensitivity to it, or the fact that I hadn't done it for a while, I had a really powerful experience.
Yeah.
And I kind of used that evening as like the crux of a turning point for me, because there was something about the first place that my mind went to when I kind of went out of myself was this. It's so strange, but like the first thing that happened was I went, oh yeah, God. It was so weird. I can't even, that's like the way I describe it. Was like, I started to feel this euphoria. I started to feel this sense of release of my panic and my anxieties, and I started to go out and out and out, and I was in this place where my ideas and thoughts, and words like soul and God and all these things, they went from just being things I could think about, and I felt them as experiences. And so when I felt this experience of God, it was like, oh.
Yeah.
And what it felt like to me was, one, a remembrance. It was like I remembered something I had forgotten a very, very long time ago, which was a really powerful experience. I feel like this is something that feels utterly new, and also so myself.
Yeah.
So much myself that I forgot to take notice of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other interesting thing that felt very prevalent to me in the moment was, it felt like I had fallen through a doorway that I had been scratching around trying to find for the past 20 something years.
Like a moment of grace almost.
Completely. It was this moment of like, the thing that I was always looking for and couldn't quite find, or I'd listen to a piece of music and that was almost it, or it reminded me of it, or I'd see some theater and it's getting close, I could taste it, but never feeling it. I felt it. And like the feeling of it was just this, it was freedom. It was, any word you want to put to it. It was this sense of fulfillment, completion, wholeness, purpose in solely existing. It was just like flavors of that. So I woke up the next morning and my life was changed completely. I knew it started subtly, but I knew in that moment, I was like, whatever I thought I was living for, this is it. And suddenly all those things, that all my motivations of being an actor and being a great actor and all of these things, not in their pureness, but like the parts of them that were pressurizing and all that, and the desire for the recognition and this and that, it was like just, I was just, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I was like, if this exists, if an experience, if feeling like that exists, then none of that means anything. And it wasn't the marijuana. The marijuana was like the gateway into, for me in that moment, was the gateway into that place, which was like, that feeling is who I am.
Yeah.
And if that's who I am, then my purpose in life clearly isn't to be recognized as this phenomenal actor. My purpose in life is to discover who I am and to become who I am.
Yeah. And I want to make a point, because we talk on this podcast a lot about, you know, addiction and recovery and stuff, because I am in recovery. But I want to make the point that I don't think drugs are bad. This isn't an anti-drug podcast. It's the thing that my reaction to drugs were bad, mostly. However, I have had acid trips that have been, you know, transcendent. I never found it quite with marijuana, though I did feel a loosening of, I suppose I did feel a little bit of the ego kind of dropping back and just allowing myself to be. So I just wanted to say that for listeners, that because, you know, I don't want anyone to think that this is an anti-drug podcast. It's not. Drugs aren't the problem. My reaction to drugs are the problem, you know.
I so appreciate that. Honestly, like also just that's a beautiful way to put that. And because I feel the same way in my life, and as I've been sober and as I've been in places where I don't experiment as much with substances, I always do make it clear to people, like, it's not a judgment if you do.
Yeah.
It's so I appreciate you saying that. And also it's interesting because a big part of my story does involve the use of marijuana specifically. Yeah, and it is its own story as well. Like,
so you wake up that morning and your life has changed.
Yeah, it was dramatic.
Yeah.
It was dramatic.
Where do you go from there?
Yeah, I woke up that morning. I mean, like, to give like analogies or examples, I woke up that morning and it was like it was like I began my life again. It was like all those feelings of like release and freedom. I mean, I was just like, oh shit, I have a new reason to live. And this reason, I know, and it sounds intense and dramatic. And if you know me, if you're a friend of mine, you know, like when it was acting, it was like the same. All right, let's dive all in.
Yeah.
You know,
no half measures.
no,
You're in good company here, brother.
That's, it was when the God drug bit, it was like, oh shit, here we go. The beauty with this one was, again, like what I began to experience with it and feel with it was like, as opposed to this idea of enlightenment being something that you're going to think yourself into, something you're going to work hard and discover you're going to solve it. And oh, I'm enlightened now. It was like, this is, rather than like an endless learning, this is an endless forgetting.
Absolutely, an endless unlearning. That's been my experience with meditation. It's amazing how I mean, you have to kind of learn the fundamentals initially to calm the mind a little. Once that's calmed, even 8 years in, I meditated for about 50 minutes last night and just had this, like, still the mind is so conditioned to try and grab on and make things happen. And it's about, meditation is doing nothing, really. At its core, it's completely, you don't, I think people think you need to stop yourself having thoughts. Well, you can't. And actually, it just gives them power if you try and wrestle with them. It's allowing those thoughts to come and seeing that they come and go and that they have no power over you, really.
It's perfectly said. I mean, and that really is the, like, anything you can think about isn't it. Anything, and not to sound obtuse, but that, it really is like, as you get to the depths of meditation, as you said, we don't quite realize just how endless our thoughts are. And I like to point out just how subtle our thoughts, how subtle our identification with those thoughts are. And the more that we practice loosening that identification through things like meditation or even spiritual study or some beautiful practices, the more we practice those methods and that identification loosens, the more you see how much you're holding on to that you're not even aware of. And these are like subtle structures of ego and conceptualization, ways for the mind to feel safe.
Yeah.
The
ego desperately wants identification and to be heard. because without it, it'll die. And
Yeah,
I think when you talk about the unlearning supposed to learning, I think the thing I've seen is there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, and I've found some semblance of wisdom when the mind is calmed. You see things as they actually are, and it's a subtle difference, but it's a big difference, really.
absolutely true.
Mm.
Absolutely. That difference between knowledge and wisdom, knowledge is, it's more stuff to gather in many ways. And they can work in tandem often. One of my favorite spiritual teachers is this person named Ram Dass, and he often talks about you have to get trapped by a method
Mm.
in order for it to work, and then the hope is that the method will self-destruct at a certain point.
Yeah.
You have to allow yourself to be trapped into it. So sometimes knowledge, it's like it's this two-way, this dance almost, where you can accrue more learning that helps you get a bit of leverage on where you thought you were or how you thought it was. But then you have to let go of the latter.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing for all of us in any aspect in our life, is to there's a great Buddhist analogy, which is, you take a boat from one shore to another. But when you get to the other shore, you don't drag your boat with you along the beach. Madness. You have to leave your boat at the shore and continue on to the island.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's I like a lot of what Eckhart Tolle says about thought. He says there is a place for thought, and there's a place for thinking and rationalization. It's being able to put it down, and he says you. I will butcher the quote, but he's basically saying you can plan for the future while being in the present. It's when you're stuck in the future that the problems start arising.
yes, absolutely.
Mm.
I mean, there's another great one. It's the ego is a beautiful servant, but a lousy master.
Mm. Yeah.
That one, and because it isn't this journey to me, I've been through so many spectrums of, all right, time to annihilate any sense of myself. The ego, going to annihilate the ego, then towards, from a place of being fully in the ego without even knowing. And I'm now at a place where it's like your ego it's like your spacesuit. You know what I mean? Your body and your ego is like you need it in order to function on this plane. It's about
Mm.
where you are in relation to it.
That's a really good way of putting it, because I think I'm still at a place where I've been constantly going, I need to work at letting the ego go, and it feels almost like it's only going to be an act of grace that will have that moment, like like your moment or Eckhart Tolle's moment that he talks about, where things transformed. But yeah, where you are in relation to the ego, I like that.
It's
Mm.
been very liberating for me, and actually the irony of it is, as soon as I accepted the fact that I I have this ego, I am this ego in ways, as soon as I allowed that and accepted that to be, my spiritual practice, like, went it accelerated in so many ways. And says something says basically the exact same thing, and I started to really live that, which was when I started to just let. It's a wild journey, this thing of, because you get high, you feel God, you taste God, and you go, okay, I just want that. And then everything that feels less than that, you're pushing away and you're clinging to the high, which is what I did. And after I had that moment, and, I felt like my life changed. I was like, okay, now I'm going for God, and that's that or go broke.
And that's the basic tenet of kind of meditation, and especially the Buddha's teaching, is no clinging and no aversion.
Yes.
In a nutshell, don't
Yeah.
cling to anything, don't
And
be averse to anything.
which is, and that is a wild dance to
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
aversion, because I found in my personal life, most of the things that torture me are not my attachments, they're my aversions.
Mm. The fears.
Most of the things that really still have a hold on me and drive my actions in ways that are unconscious are my aversions, or the
Yeah.
things, thoughts I'm not allowing to exist and recognize. And my current teacher, he really puts it in a beautiful way. One of my teachers, he says, you know, as long as you're in a desire resist relationship to anything, it still has a hold on. Desire resist is just another way of saying that, you know, attachment aversion. But as we sit down to meditate, thoughts arise, and thoughts that are very dystonic to our sense of self, to our ego. It's wild, you know, when Buddha sat under the tree and sat there for 40 days and achieved enlightenment, he was visited by demons and angels and all of these, just, it was this onslaught, this war, everything. I mean, it was just the most vivid thing possible. And I love this story because, well, you know, from my understanding and my own experience in meditation, you know, as you let go of the outside world, as you start to go in and you let go of the things that you're perceiving within yourself, you know, your thoughts, the surface thoughts, you go deeper and deeper, and the thoughts as they arise, you know, and even these base thoughts, and we talked about Caroline Leslie, one of our teachers, the pride and shame thoughts,
Yeah.
right? These approaching actors, as those come up, I mean, just to witness them feels like you're living them. You know, to witness those deepest shame thoughts that we all have, and they're unique to us often. And when those come up, just to allow ourselves to recognize them is too much to bear. Feels too much to bear. You know, that's why we push them down and they work on us consciously.
Yeah.
But when you allow one of those to come up and see it fully and witness it and acknowledge it, it's almost like you become it. And then in the becoming of it, you know, in the allowance of that thought to be like, what if that was okay? What if that thought was okay to acknowledge? I am, and like you just, it literally, it's like you're pulling a weed out of your body, and then you feel the thing just come up and come out. And
one of the most kind of profound things I've learned or experienced in the time since getting sober is that I hadn't really sat with my emotions or my darker thoughts or my feelings for 27 years. I just pushed them down and tried to numb them with whatever I could find for 27 years, really. And then when I put down all the substances, I had to sit with them for the first time. And it was painful initially, but actually I noticed that witnessing and that allowing it to be and knowing it's not going to kill you, they pass quicker than I'd ever experienced. And it's like, oh, I can get through that. I just want to get back to so you go from this profound experience that night, and then your journey from there in terms of action. What was your action?
So, I mean, it was kind of glorious that this happened in the pandemic, because I had all the time in the world. I had nothing else going on. So I just took that opportunity and I went full into, okay, well, let's start reading. I was immediately drawn to Buddhism. So I bought some Buddhist texts to read. I started finding some new age spirituality. I just went straight into, my first instinct was to go to God and to go, okay, like let's look into this. Let's look into the soul. Who am I? What am I really doing here? What does it mean to be alive? All these things. But in this much wider context, it felt, than I'd previously been allowing myself to experience. Again, I mentioned Scott and Noah. I was so lucky because they both love Eckhart Tolle and had been into a lot of these concepts of the soul and energy and our identities, beings that are beyond our physical body or including our physical body, but a wider context. And so um, they were great teachers to me. They put me in touch with people to speak to. They offered me concepts and teachings that I had never really had the opportunity to listen to fully and the opportunity to hear. So I just let myself be immersed in their teaching, in the books I was reading. And for the first time in my life, these things that were being told to me again, I mentioned it was like putting pieces of a puzzle together, and everything I got, I'd read a line and it was like, oh, right. I mean, I literally felt like, I had discovered this ancient, parchment that was torn into 1,000 pieces, and every one I put together felt like this clue that was more meaningful than anything I'd done in my life up to that. It all felt so real and so beautiful. And like I was discovering myself in this beautiful secret.
Mm.
And I continued to smoke, but I did so again. I feel very grateful. Like what I was led to was I would make a ritual out of it. So like I would sit down and I had an altar and I would pray. I would like put out a prayer or make an intention and say, okay, tonight I want to learn about this. Or like, please teach me about this word, whether it be soul or something. So I put this prayer out and I would smoke with as a ritual.
Mm.
And, you know, I cannot begin to describe like the beauty of that experience at that time. It was like feeling a part of something ancient and beautiful. I learned so much from doing that. Everything felt like this great adventure. Um, and after a while, I started to see how it was getting a bit out of hand, and there are pitfalls to every method, and everything. And particularly on the spiritual journey, it's no mistake that all of the analogies are like walking into a gnarled, dark forest as you start to go into yourself. Because man, oh man, spiritual journey is synonymous in many ways with a journey into the recesses of your own mind.
Mm.
Because really, like what we're doing is we're letting go of the clingings of mind in order to experience something that is present beyond our mind, an identity that is outside of our thinking mind. And so but in order to do that, you have to work through a lot of subconscious stuff in your own mind. So as I started to go deeper into that, I mean, there's just so many places to get hooked and trapped and side routes to go down that kind of lead to nowhere. Lots of astral scenarios, big metaphorical, like it's just more ego stuff, but it's now subtle and it's spiritual ego. And
it's a huge pitfall, that spiritual ego stuff.
Mm. It really, really is, because you start to feel like and that's what the ego is so so beautifully subtle about it. How are you it's another Ram Dass, but it's like, how are you going to kill something when the knife that you use to kill it is it as well?
Mm.
And that is the ego. The ego is the monster you're killing. It's also the knife that you're using to kill it. So it's like just so subtle. So for as much as I was learning, I was also getting hooked and caught in some dead ends. Some places that were, the mind is endless. So it's like you just go down endless routes. And that's a big thing I've learned over the past 3 years in this journey. It's basically been 3 years since this all happened now, this week, basically. So it's kind of exciting.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
A rebirth of sorts.
Yes. Oh my God. So I start going deep into my spiritual study. I start doing this prayer smoking, and I had a mentor at the time who Scott put me in touch with, and she said, "All right, you have to ground yourself because you're gonna blow yourself out and keep doing this the way you're doing it. Um, so you need, be in your body. You need to get in your body." So we're in like July now of the pandemic, and she says, "Get in my body." And so rather than like working out and stopping smoking weed, I was like, okay, I'll move to Montana and I'll go, work on a ranch in Montana. That'll
Yeah,
my body. Um, and so that's what I did. I left New York. I sublet,
amazing.
and I was like, I'm gonna go out to Montana because I was like, when else am I gonna get to do this? If
Mm.
I'm an actor, and when am I gonna get to leave New York and do these things? So I moved to Montana. I have a friend who lives out there in the middle of nowhere, and he got me some work on some ranches. Um, Man, I was planning to live out there for like 6 months. And I was going to go out there. I was going to continue my spiritual study and audition when they were coming through. But that was the plan. I was going to take that opportunity to get more in my body as I learned about this. So I go out there, and up until that point, my spiritual journey and this whole thing had been just like all love and light. I mean, I turned into a hippie like instantly, and I loved living there. I mean, I was just so at peace, so happy. And I was like, at a certain point, this has got to get intense, right? This has got to get hard and dark. But
Mm.
it hadn't up to that point. It'd been like 5 months of just like bliss. Then I go to Montana, and I'm there, and I stop smoking pretty much on a dime. And I I'm Jewish by birth, and so I was like, I felt this calling to like learn more about my birth religion.
Mm.
Really, it's no accident. So I decided I would read the Torah by myself, you know, and so I did, and it scared the shit out of me.
Really?
Scared the shit out of me.
Mm.
Um, and it was this strange like sequence of events, but I was in Montana. I started suddenly to like doubt the naivety I was feeling around my spiritual journey. I some like very old fears and insecurities that I thought were gone started to come up around like guilt and not being enough and these things. And within like the span of 2 weeks, all that, and then I pinched my sciatic nerve in my back, and it was
Ouch.
the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life. And I couldn't walk, and I had to go home. I had to go to Chicago. So like over the course of 2 weeks, like all of a sudden my relationship to God turned from one of total love and acceptance to fear. I encountered this part of myself that was afraid of God, that was afraid of doing wrong.
What
And
what was it, sorry, about the Torah that brought those fears up? Was it kind of that, because the I haven't read the Torah, but I've read a lot of the Old Testament. And
so the Torah,
was it that version of God that kind of scared the shit out of you? Because it's very easy to be scared the shit out of by that version of God.
exactly. I mean, so yeah, what really happened was I started to Judaism is this beautiful mystical religion. I now know, and I have a deep relationship with it now. Um, but when you read and the Torah itself, which is the Old Testament as well as some more books,
Right.
um, and I basically what I read was the first 5 books, which comprises the Christian New Testament. And you know, when you read that without a guide and you read it literally, I mean, it's scary because it's this presentation of an angry, vengeful God, and it talks a lot about, you know, idol worship, and I was, you know, with relationship to Buddhism and Hinduism, and suddenly I started to, and in my experience, when I was in my place of true spirituality, what I felt was that without question, everything is one. All paths are just different paths up the same mountain, and you just got to pick the one that's most meaningful to you. You know, I didn't doubt that, but as soon as I got into my mind, all of a sudden it was like, well, have I done something wrong here? Have I, you know? And what I encountered were these really deep superstitions and fears that I had somehow betrayed God, and that I was doing what God didn't want me to do. You know, and then again, I encountered the separation where God became this figure outside of myself, this separate entity, something that was to be feared, um, and something that existed as we do, with judgments and, you know, you can please me or you can upset me, all these things. And so it just kind of reading the Old Testament, reading the Hebrew Bible, and then these doubts starting to creep up, what it did was it unearthed some previous fears that were there but just weren't coming to the surface. And then they came up with a vengeance, and I went fully into those. And then I get injured. Someone is living in my apartment in New York, so I have to go to Chicago where my folks are. Suddenly I'm injured. I'm living back at home in my parents' house. I'm freaking out. I have like this totally fearful relationship that I feel like I can't tell anyone. You know, I have no one to talk to about this. 2 weeks after I get back, 3 weeks after I get back, my grandfather gets COVID and ends up in a coma. And so we drive down to Florida where he lives, and we're there for 6 weeks while he's in a coma. He ends up dying. You know, it was just this, like, all at once.
Everything. Yeah.
Caving
in. Yeah.
And
grief never comes as single spies, but in battalions is one of my favorite lines from Hamlet, and it's often so true.
Gosh, I mean, it's exactly what it was. It was a battalion rushing in. And, you know, the worst part about it was that I didn't really feel like I had anyone I could talk to about what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
Because it all sounded so crazy. And it was tough as well. Like, as my you know, as I was approaching death, which is the time when you most need a solid foundation of spirituality as something that is loving and unconditional, I was in this place of confusion and fear. It was hard, you know. And looking back on it, it was certainly the hardest portion of my life. But as I see it now, 2 years later, looking at that period of time, I just see how clearly in the same way that I personally don't feel that there are any accidents, you know. And as we said at the beginning of this podcast, you know, the storms are there, chipping away the ego, revealing something. It's like I had to go fully into my fear and my superstition and all of my wacky habits and patterns in mind, all the things that weren't God, and going through them and seeing that and feeling that and living that, and then coming out the other side, which eventually happened. It was like an exorcism in so many ways. You know, it was like
a purging. Catharsis. And yeah.
It was difficult, but I now see it as a necessary portion of my journey.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I'm back in Chicago. Go get back after my grandfather passes, and it was a strange thing too. He was like the patriarch of our family, um, and there are certain things I could never have done with him alive. I don't know if I'd have been able to like withstand the pressure. Like as soon as he passed, like the day that he passes, the last day I ate meat.
Right.
It was a big part of our family, and I knew that as long as he was alive, like I just would never have been able to go vegetarian. It was a pressure I wouldn't have been able to withstand. Something I really wanted to do. So it was a strange timing. But I get back to Chicago. I'm confused, feeling lost. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm driving DoorDash because, like, again, I can't move back to New York. Um, I just feel totally lost. I still have my representation as an actor, and I'm auditioning as and when they come through, so it's starting to come out, but that's starting to feel less meaningful. Um, and then I hadn't smoked at this point in like 4 months, and something in me was like, why don't you try it? Might help you with some anxiety you're feeling. I mean, I was just anxious all day. Um, and I did, and I made a ritual out of it. I was looking for clarity, and again, it was like I'll never forget again this experience. It was like for 4 months I was in total contraction, and the second that I smoked, it was like I just felt this release, everything I was holding on to in this space. And again, my first thought was this memory of, oh, it is all okay.
Mm.
It was like this real deep feeling of okayness.
Yeah.
Memory of like, that was all like all the guilt, all the stuff. It was just such a deep mental trip. And it offered me in that moment enough space to see my projections and my guilt and my fears with some clarity, not being fully engaged in them.
Not being so identified.
Yeah, not being so
Yeah.
identified with it. I was
Mhm.
able to witness
To
it, just
witness it. Yeah.
even just a
Yeah. Just a little space can be like 1,000 miles. Yeah. Mhm.
and having that space, having that witness, it really led me back into something that was yeah, important for me. I mean, again, like grief never comes as single spies within battalions, but also I find grace has a similar way of acting.
Mm.
That in the same way that all that happened at once that kind of led me into that crazy feeling of depression and anxiety, that difficult experience. In the same weekend, I I was driving DoorDash, and I was really like, I had this goal. I had to make a certain amount of money. And my friend came up to me and said, "Oh, hey, Mikey, why don't we go for a walk in the park tomorrow? It's going to be beautiful." And in my head, there's this voice saying, "Don't say yes. You don't do it. You've got this thing you have to do. You said you were going to make money. You said you're going to do this. Don't say yes. Don't say yes. Don't say yes." And I'm like, "Sure, man, that sounds great." The voice in the head goes, "You idiot. You never do it right. You're always, acquiescing, all that." So we go for the walk, have a great time. I'm at the end of it, I'm like, I'm glad I went. And then he says, "Great, this was awesome. So should we do tomorrow too?" My head voice is saying, "All right, Mikey, here's your opportunity. You fucked up yesterday. Now's your chance. Do not say yes. Here you go. You can stand up for yourself and what you're doing." And I'm like, "Tomorrow sounds great, man. Let's do it." He can tell I was freaking out. So he was like, "All right, why don't we go to the park near your house?" So we go to the park near my house, and uh, we're in the park and we're going the long route. I was like, you know what, fuck it, let's just go for it. I'm here. All of a sudden, I hear Mikey. I look up and Ben, and it's my old grade school teacher I hadn't seen since I graduated 8th grade.
Wow.
I haven't seen him in years. And I went to a very small Montessori school, so like we're all close. We're all, it's our teachers were very close with us. So I see him, and it's this great reunion. And, oh man! And at that time, I was doing a little after-school teaching over Zoom. So we talk to him, catch up a bit, and we go on our way. And I leave seeing him, and in my head, I'm going, man, I don't know if I made a good impression. It's kind of whatever. I don't know if that was so good. I'll let it go. Then a couple hours later, I get a text, and it says, Mikey, this is Ben. I got your number from a friend. Could you call me later? I have an idea for you. I have something that I want to ask you about. And he calls me and he says, look, this is so crazy, but 3 days ago, one of the assistant teachers in the 4th grade class had to call out for the rest of the year. We need someone to fill in for the next 3 months who knows Montessori education and can take this on a short notice. You want to do it? And at that time, I was looking for a good job that was going to be 3 months long that I could do until July when I'd move back to New York. I mean, it was just this godsend. So, absolutely. And so I get this job. It's this very serendipitous thing. That weekend is the weekend that I smoke, and I have this opening, this re-remembering. And then the day after that, or 2 days after that, when I'm going into school for the first time, I drive in. I hear this. I was looking for something on Alan Watts, which was something that a friend of mine recommended to me. And I stumble across this podcast of Ramdas, who's this spiritual teacher from the 60s. He died a few years ago. And I click on this podcast, and it's the mashup between him and Alan Watts. And I love Alan. I love
Alan Watts as well.
Every time I hear this other voice, this clip from these Ramdas teachings, I'm like, who is this? Because when he's speaking, it's literally like it's like I was speaking to myself. No other way of describing it than this feeling of like total recognition in another person. And it was just incredible. So all in the same weekend, this influx of, I see them as karmic downloads, in the same way that like my injury and my first engagement with Judaism and my grandfather all happened at the same time. Like this opportunity at my school, this Ramdas, my reopening, it all happened in the same weekend. So at this point in my life, I really was just like a leaf getting, blown back and forth. But so then began this period of time where I entered like a second bliss period, where
get the second wave.
I got the second wave.
You're very lucky. I don't think many people get the second wave.
Well, it's my message is, if you're in the darkness now, hold out, because it comes. It really does. The first taste is there to get you, and then once you got the universe, like, all right, now it begins the work. Then every now and then you get some tastes again. But I had this second awakening, and this one, whereas before I was doing all this exploring and adventuring, this one was very centered around Ramdas. Now, Ramdas is, as I mentioned, this beautiful teacher who has this amazing story.
Thank you for the podcast recommendation, by the way. I listened to the episode you sent me, you recommended, and I've also gone from the start and I'm listening through. So thank you for that. We should shout it out. What's the podcast? Is it the Be Here Now podcast? Because that was his book, wasn't it? It was Be Here Now.
Here and Now with Ramdas.
Here and Now with Ramdas. Yeah.
It's on the Be Here Now network. This is a portion of my life and my journey and my story that I still struggle to speak about because it, yeah, again, once again, changed my life in such a deep way. So Ram Dass, maybe it's worth it me just sharing a bit about him.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's my personal journey is sort of impossible to tell without talking about him. But Ram Dass was born Richard Alpert, Jewish guy from Boston in the 50s. He became a Freudian psychologist, an analyst. He was a teacher at Harvard. And around the age of 28 or so, this other teacher came to Harvard. This is in 1963, named Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure the name will be familiar to some, was this huge psychedelic pioneer in the 60s, a big counterculture figure. But at the time, he was this psychologist primarily working in game theory who came to Harvard to teach. And him and Richard Alpert at the time, they developed a friendship. They respected each other's work. Over the summer, Tim Leary goes to Mexico and he tries psilocybin. And this is, before it was what it is now. And he goes to this village, and he has it in a ceremonial rite with one of the famous Mexican spiritual leaders at the time, and he comes back and he tells Richard Alpert, what I learned in the 2 hours that I had this experience on these mushrooms was more than I've learned in my entire career in psychology. What I learned about the mind in those 2 hours is more than I learned in my entire career. Mm-hmm. And so Richard Alpert's hesitant, doesn't really know, and he has Tim Leary brings him back to Harvard, and one night, Richard Alpert, Tim Leary, and another person, a very famous poet, they do it. And similarly to my experience, Ram Dass, Richard Alpert has this, 180-degree moment. His experience is really beautiful. He was sitting there and he suddenly saw in the corner of the room all of the versions of himself that he was identified with. So he saw Richard Alpert, the doctor, and he could see that that wasn't him. And then he saw Richard Alpert, the man. See that I can witness that. If I can see that, that must not be me. Saw Richard Alpert, the son, Richard Alpert, the lover, saw all these versions of himself. To the point where he realized that, who he was seemed to be much larger than any roles that he could play. And then, the joy, the freedom, everything he felt, it was like a life-changing moment. He went, okay, this clearly must be the next frontier of human mind. So then from 63 to 67, him and Tim Leary, they get kicked out of Harvard for their experiments with psilocybin. It's the first professors in the history of Harvard to get kicked out.
I was literally listening at Montreal airport, listening to the episode where he describes this being kicked out of Harvard. It was brilliant. Waiting for my flight, listening to that.
I mean, it's one of the things that you'll see as you listen to him, and anyone, if you listen to him, I mean, he's just so funny and so
he has a very, I know exactly what you mean when you say it feels like he's speaking directly to you. There's a lot of spiritual teachers that I love, but their way of communicating is somehow, I don't know, kind of puts you at a distance slightly, a sort of, I guess, ethereal nature to them. Whereas
exactly. No,
whereas I feel Ram Dass is he just sounds like a very intelligent, enlightened human being who has had this amazing experience and wants to share it with you.
That is, to me, what I is so beautiful about him. And to me, what he represents as real spirituality
Mm.
in deep ways. I mean, I really don't mean to speak judgmentally in this moment. I try not to, but I think there's a tendency when we get involved in a spiritual life, and I fell into this quite heavily, as I'll get to shortly. I apologize for the length of my story, but uh, there's a tendency to like, he calls it, Ramdas even calls it, get phony holy, and he speaks about that because he did the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, but our real spirituality embraces our humanity, and it isn't this thing of like, I am this untouchable, effervescent thing that you can be one day if you're good.
Mm.
It's like, I am who I am, and who I am is a part of this glorious oneness. I have enough space to witness the manifestation of who I am, not be fully identified with it, that I can inhabit a space of love and
Mm.
trust and spaciousness that allows me to both be that messy, erring human and also explore this wider self, this spiritual self. And that to me is real. It's the spirituality we need in this moment.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
couldn't agree. I really couldn't agree more. And actually, it's something that I feel has blocked me in the past of that not accept. I loved what you said earlier about kind of being the spacesuit is the ego. I felt like unless I get completely unidentified with everything, then I'm not on the journey. I've not got there yet. And the whole point is that you don't get there really. It's
and you just change your perspective of
yeah.
where here is,
Hmm.
and that's exactly it. And I mean, if we think we're ever going to defeat this thing inside of us, if we ever think that we're going to, the only way that the parts of ourselves that maybe act unconscious change is when we offer them space to exist without judgment.
Hmm.
You know, to me, in many ways, yoga, which, and I don't mean hatha yoga, which is physical yoga. I
Hmm.
mean yoga in the sense of yoga. The Sanskrit word means union, and so whether you're doing hatha yoga, which are the poses, or um, bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of devotion, or jnana yoga, which is meditation. All of these things, what they mean is they are practices to lead towards you,
Hmm.
towards that space of undifferentiated awareness, the
Yeah.
oneness, that sense of non-duality. And uh, yeah, the yoga is, to me, in many ways, non-judgmental, compassionate witness consciousness. Something that comes from a teacher of mine, um, and his lineage, Swami Kripalu, a really beautiful Hindu mystic and teacher. He used to say, yoga is non-judgmental, compassionate witness consciousness.
Mm.
And that's
because
really,
because the judgmental sorry, I'm just turning my phone to airplane mode because it just went
oh,
off. The judgment of, and this is what I get into a trap with meditation, is the judgment of those thoughts is itself the ego. So it's this kind of thing. It's like trying to bite your own teeth. You with yeah, that's sorry, that's a slight
it's
tangent, but I'm just going through my own troubles with my
beautiful
egoic self at the moment.
to be able to even see that, man. It's
Mm.
like so beautiful because that's
It's such a
exactly,
subtle foe, and I need to stop seeing it as a foe. I think that's the
I know
problem.
that's really the
Yeah.
like, because as long as it exists as a foe, it exists.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
it's just another part of nature. It just is what it
Yeah.
is.
Absolutely.
Um,
So
yeah,
Ramdas, the
yeah,
influence.
he for 4 years experiments with psilocybin and psychedelics and acid, and everything under the sun. You know, very much as a scientist, trying to get high and stay high. In his own words, he's like, "That's what we were trying to do. We are trying to get high and stay high." And then he goes to India on a whim, and he's there, and he meets this man living in the mountains who is this really beautiful spiritual figure in India at the time named Karoli Baba. And he said what I experienced when I met this person was different to anything he had experienced on psychedelics. He's like, I met this person, he looked in my eyes, and it's a really beautiful story. So he goes, and there's all these people sitting around this old Indian man wrapped in a blanket. And Ram Dass felt very uncomfortable. He's like, oh, this is kind of culty. I'm not really into this whole thing. A bit weird. And then they call him over. Now, the night previous, Ram Dass was staying in this little village, and he was out using the restroom, you know, in the middle of the night. And he was like looking up at the stars, and he thought about his mother, who passed away 6 months earlier. And it was the first time he'd really thought of her, and he felt like this real, he felt her presence, and he felt like this sense of love coming from him. It was interesting. He thought about it, and then he completely forgot that happened. So then this guy calls him over. It's the next day. He's feeling uncomfortable. And, you know, Ram Dass has all these thoughts of like, it's a scam. This whole thing is kind of ridiculous. And the guy in the blanket, he says, oh, you're American? And through a translator, and Ram Dass says, yeah. He says, oh, you have money? And Ram Dass says, yeah, a little bit, you know, back home. He says, you give to me? You give me your money? And Ram Dass in his head is going, see, I'm getting fleeced. You know, this is ridiculous. This guy's just doing this thing. And all the people around him are laughing and giggling so hard, right? It's a weird thing. And then a little time goes by, and calls Ram Dass back over. He sits down and he says, last night, you were looking at the stars? And silence. And Ram Dass goes, yeah. And the man in the blanket goes, oh, you were thinking about your mother? And Ram Dass he hadn't said a word to anyone. This is before self is anything, you know, before any sort of, this guy in the Himalayas. And Ram Dass' jaws open, can't believe it. Yeah. And the man in the blanket goes, she died last year, yes? And this is all through a translator. And Ram Dass says, in this moment, his mind is firing faster than he's ever experienced it, trying to figure out any possible way that this man could know the things that he knows. And could be saying the things that he's saying. It's going at like 1,000 miles an hour. He's like, is it, you know, the FBI, you know, he was wanted for a while. Is this some weird, you know, is he being tapped? But that's impossible. All this crazy, all the paranoia is just going.
Some and then the MK Ultra shit or something.
Yeah, literally. You know, the paranoia can't make sense of this. The mind can't make sense of any of this. And then the man in the blanket leans in, looks him in the eye, and in English, he says, spleen. And that's what his mother died of, was a ruptured spleen. In this moment, the man looks at him, he says that word. He looks at this man in the blanket, and his mind went tilt. There was no possible way that this person could know the things that he was saying. He said as soon as his mind went tilt, it gave up. His ego gave up. Yeah. And his heart, he said he experienced this rip in his heart, this painful breaking. And the love that he felt in that moment was beyond anything he could possibly imagine. He looked at this man, and this man was looking at him with so much love in his eyes. He said, this person knows every thought I'm having in this moment. Knows everything about me, everything I've ever done, every thought I'm having in this moment, every thought I've ever had, and he loves me unconditionally. Just, and again, it's beyond idea. He's not like, he told me he loves me, so he felt in the, he felt at home in that moment more than he'd ever felt in his entire life. Because he feels this rip in his heart. He enters this, leaves his mind behind, goes into the heart, this huge heart space, and he cried for 2 days straight. He ends up staying in India at the ashram of this person for the next, I think it was 6 months. And he becomes a yogi. I mean, he leaves everything behind. He studies the spiritual texts. He lives in this ashram. He becomes, basically a monk living with this person. And what that is, and it's very taboo in America and in the West, but it's called Guru Kripa, which is the grace of the Guru, and it's a real spiritual path and practice. Extremely common in India is the veneration of a human being as a saint and as a guru. It's a very deep path. It's very beautiful. It's my own personal path is Guru Kripa. Unfortunately, like gurus in the West, it carries a very cultish connotation to it. But what it really is like seeing the divine in another human being and trusting and serving that and loving that and trusting that love for you. It's the point where, you realize that you and this being, this divinity behind both of the beings are actually not separate.
That's the key, I think, to everything, which we'll talk about later, but carry on. Yeah.
Exactly. There's no separation. There's no, no higher and lower, all those things. But yeah, so, Richard Alpert becomes Ram Dass. He devotes his life to yoga and to God in a really direct way now. And, from that moment, everything changed for him. Again, he was still exploring acid at this point and psilocybin. And it's amazing. He had these, high potency tabs of acid. They were in pills.
Good shit.
Working with good shit. And it's like weeks after he's been at the ashram, and Neem Karoli Baba looks at him and says, you have your medicine? And at this point, Ram Dass had been going around India giving acid to yogis and seeing what's happening. Giving acid to guys who'd been meditating for 20 years in a cave and seeing what was happening. And, all of them had, some of them were like, oh, this is amazing. This is this beautiful God drug. And other ones were like, oh, they had bad trips. They were like, this isn't good, So, but it affected all of them. So Neem Karoli Baba says, oh, you have your medicine? And Ram Dass goes, what? He said, your medicine, the medicine, the yogi medicine. And Ram Dass can't for the life of him think, well, what is he talking about? It's been weeks since he's even thought about acid. And his friend who he's with leans over to him, he's like, it's the acid, I think. And Ram Dass goes, oh, the acid? Maharaji goes, yes, the yogi medicine. Just give me. I want to try. So Ram Dass gives him, and this is an old man in a blanket, right? And Ram Dass is like, this is intense. He said, each of these pills are 300 micrograms of acid. It's too much. And Maharaji goes, give it to me. And so Ram Dass gives him one. And he swallows it. And he goes, give me another. Now this is 2. This is 600 micrograms of acid, like pure,
shit that keeps you tripping for like years. Those people who kind of never fully come out of them.
Exactly. And Neem Karoli Baba goes, give me another one. So he takes it. That's 2. And then he goes, more. And so he has three, is 900 micrograms of this acid. And Ramdas is like, I just killed this man. Like this death is gonna be on my hands. This is so crazy. And nothing happened. Um, Nothing at all. He sat with him the whole day, and he didn't. Nothing in his demeanor changed. Um, every now and then he would kind of like look at Ramdas and giggle, and then he would like make a face like he was like. It was wild, and so in that moment, Ramdas kind of lost all his interest in psychedelics. He was like, and I love the way he describes it. He's like, if you're in Detroit, you don't need to take a bus to Detroit.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah. No.
So kind of, for him, that was a really important moment in him kind of going, whatever it is I've been searching outside of myself and through the use of substances, clearly it's within me.
It's good. It's really good on a personal level to hear that, because I have, one thing with, I'm in a 12-step program, and that means I've made a commitment, to be sober off everything. And I have been interested in the past, and there are other psychedelics that I would have wanted to try in the future, but it's good to know that, there are other paths to seeking.
And that is the conclusion that he really came to. Someone who was this huge psychedelic pioneer, he really was like, it's not necessary.
Right.
That's where his research ended in many ways. It's helpful if you want to do it. It's not something you need to do in order to find God. So I really am happy about that as well. And he continued to experiment with them throughout his life, but yeah, I really am glad that that's kind of like where he got to with it personally as well. But yeah, right. So then he spends the rest of his life, gets back to America, spends the rest of his life basically teaching about yoga and teaching about God. But when I say teaching about God, I mean he really is describing this place within ourselves that is not separate from anything else. It's interconnected to the rest of life. And
well, let's get onto it. Let's talk about God.
Yeah.
Because we'll come back to the rest of your story and your journey later, but I think this is the perfect moment to talk about it, because it's a word that has a lot of connotations for a lot of people. And I was just wondering if you are happy to share what your concept of God is and what God means to you, and the change you've seen in your life since finding a relationship to God, however you view it or him, her, everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In all honesty, it's a question I'm constantly engaged in.
Yeah, me too.
Who is God? What is this? And ultimately, any answer that can be given is less than what it is. In my experience, God is it is the answer that lives outside of your mind. That when it is experienced, there is no you to be experiencing it anymore. There is no it to be experienced. It is like, it's beautiful in the Hebrew Bible when Moses asks God, well, what am I going to tell them that your name is when they ask? It says, Eye Asher Eye, which in Hebrew means, I am who I am.
Wow. Fucking hell.
Literally, that's the Bible too.
Yeah.
I am who I am, or I am that I am. And it's God to me is when I feel that I'm in touch with God, who I think I am. This person I'm more often identified with, this body, this personality, that begins to widen.
Mm.
And what I experience is a sense of meaning. I experience a sense of bliss and joy, purpose, presence, eternal. Like these words that we throw around, they become, to me, they become real. And so God, to me, in many ways, from one perspective, is that.
Mm.
Is this, from one level, this part of ourself at which all these qualities that we hear of joy, peace, bliss, eternal life, all these things are and exist and is real. But on another level, that is who we really are. And what we go around identifying as mostly Dan and Mikey and these bodies and these storylines, that is like, it's just the stuff of life. It's the mind.
Mm.
And our journey, God is like this totality. It's the unity of all creation, right?
Yeah.
And our journey is a journey of letting go of identification with the stuff of life, with the manifestation of life, and entering into identification with the totality that is within and of and is all of life.
The oneness.
Oneness,
Yeah.
unity.
Unity. Mm.
When we enter into that space, God is who you are.
Mm. It's interesting because I have because it's something I'm constantly thinking about as well, because it's a fairly new phenomenon in my life. You know, I haven't had a concept of God other than something that I rejected for most of my life until about, you know, a year and a bit ago. So it's something I think about a lot, and it, that oneness, when you get, and I've seen it a few times in my life, very clearly, usually during meditation, when the mind and the ego actually shuts the fuck up for a little bit and you have that pure consciousness, you realize that that's who we all really are. I have no doubt that the consciousness, the pure consciousness I experience when I experience it, is the same pure consciousness that you experience when you experience it. Therefore, that oneness. But I always ask, always ask myself the question: well, is that consciousness itself God, or is that a connection to God? And I think it's a connection to God. I always go back to the act of being creative as an example. I know, especially with songwriting, but with other forms, poetry as well, if I'm thinking about it too much, it is going to be shit. The only way I have ever created pieces that I am proud of and that I feel get to the heart of something is when I get out of the way of myself. And there's a really interesting quote from Leonard Cohen. He was asked about when Bob Dylan was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was asked, "What do you think about that?" He says, "Well, Bob won't take it too seriously because, you know, he knows as well as I do, we don't really write them." And I thought that was a really, really interesting quote and something I can totally identify with. So my concept of God, I think, is that I don't know what my concept, but I know I can connect to it, tap into it. And it's almost, I mean, if you think about it from even a scientific level, if you take it from the Big Bang, we are all made up of the same matter. Therefore, we are all, energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transferred. We are all one in that sense, if you believe nothing else. I it's indescribable. So you did a very good job of saying your concept of it, but it's so hard to.
I think it's beautiful when you say you don't really have a concept of God. I think
that's yes, yeah.
Honestly, it's our concepts of God that get in the way of us experiencing what God is.
Yeah.
God is this word that carries so much baggage for so many people, myself included, you, and
Yeah.
everyone. But again, it's a word that is meant to signify an experience. All languages,
Mm.
they're fingers pointing at the moon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what all words are: fingers pointing at the moon, and the moon is what we're trying to get to, trying to
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
You know, and that it's our concepts of God, our ideas about God that we attach onto that keep us from being what it is that God is calling us to be, being what it is that God is,
Mm.
just who you are. And when
Yeah.
and God, the invitation always is, whatever you think of me, let go, and that too, let go, and that too, let go. And we will hold on and we will scream and scream and scream and say, no, this one I can't let go of.
Yeah.
The invitation to let go further and further and further, it gets to a place where, as you said, it is indescribable. However,
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
there's
It's so interesting in hindsight, looking back at, for the most of my life that I had no concept of God and no relationship with God that I thought. Actually experiencing it now, I see that I always did. It just came, I didn't know it at the time. I felt something that I didn't know what it was. And I felt it, listening to music sometimes, or, art was often a gateway into that and things like that. Yeah. But it's the same for you. The effect on my life has been profound.
I mean,
And yeah.
it offers to me, and I mean, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And it's true. It was always there for me as well, but I hadn't touched it in a way that was powerful enough or impactful enough for me to let go of the other things I was holding on to in my life. And I mean, that is like, again, my experience of God was undeniable.
Mm.
And like that is what's so exciting to me when I talk to people who are like, this whole God thing, it's a bit like, man, when you touch this part of yourself, it is undeniably the most interesting thing that you will
Yeah.
ever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and that is like so exciting to me. And I don't share that in some way to, if you haven't touched that, to be like, no, it's nothing that like, it is already who you are.
Mm.
And all that it takes on our part often is you can fall into it as like almost accidentally, like I did, or like you just have to. I always say this to people, like just make yourself open to it
Mm.
in the universe, in yourself, in your life, to be like, and it's as simple as saying, I'm open to being surprised
Mm.
about
I always ask for guidance as well. I'm open to being guided, and it's
and it,
almost like the things the discoveries I make are sort of I'm pointed towards rather than yeah.
absolutely,
Mm.
and it takes humility to ask for guidance.
Mm.
I think this is often something that isn't really like touched on or explored, is that we don't say surprise me, to life.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite terrifying.
Yeah.
It's quite terrifying to
Yeah.
like, open yourself up to surprise. It's much easier to go, I know who I am. I know what I'm doing. I know what I want. I know what this is. I know that nothing happens after I die. Like this is it. This is but it's like, man, when you have the trust, and this is like what I really think is beautiful about what God brings into my life and brings into many people's lives, is like God in this way, God, the concept of God can also be manipulated for some pretty, you know, it's pretty unhelpful things in the world as well.
But that goes back to, I think all that is usually our structures of power that have been placed around a God's concept. The Catholic Church being a prime example of that. It's a bit, the bad things about that started with a power system. Where,
again, it's more subtle ego in a way. It's like help make us secure around things, and but when you are in a place where you can say to life, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm open to experiencing. I trust you. Suddenly, your relationship to life itself and to your life becomes one that is not based in fear, paranoia, pessimism, expectation of tragedy. It becomes one that is based in trust. And I cannot, that's easy to say, but to really stress what that means. If you're living a life where your relationship to the world around you is one of trust, I mean, talk about a gateway into real happiness.
Yeah. And that really is with all 12-step programs, the one I'm in included, is absolutely the fundamental principle is let go and let God, basically.
No, I mean
and it's a practice and it's not easy. And I still try to grasp to control a lot, but
oh my God,
the experience of letting go when you do is, I don't have words for it. I keep saying profound because it's the only thing I can kind of come up with.
Yeah. That's what makes it ultimately so so difficult to be described, so almost like, and I mean, this is like one of the things I really love about,
because it's beyond concepts. I think that's the thing, isn't it? As we were saying, and words are based around concepts,
and that's what it ultimately asks you to do, is let go of your concepts, let go of your thoughts, let go of your words. And it requires, as you said earlier, surrender. Surrender. I mean, we have such a negative connotation to the words in this culture, and it's similar to being in a relationship of trust with life. When you can surrender your control, rather than like having a life where you're trying to control the flow of the river, which is an impossible task.
And well, that was one of my favorite Lao Tzu quotes. Is he just said, "Be like water." He said it was basically asked to sum up his whole kind of philosophy. He said, "Be like water."
I mean it's flowing down the river.
Flowing down the river, it goes with whatever it comes into contact with. I love how much time do you have, by the way?
I'm good. I'm around. So
you're good. Okay, cool. Just I think a great point, because we could talk about this for hours, but a great thing to end on with our talk about that big scary word, God. I loved what you said, that it's with all of us. It's all within us. And I always loved in my early days kind of learning how to meditate properly. One of the analogies that really really struck me was that what we really are, and maybe what God is the blue sky. And the blue sky is always there, but the mind comes in with clouds to get in the way of that. But the clouds come and go. They're constantly transient. And I kind of love that. It's like we block God off sometimes, but it's there.
And when the clouds come and we go, oh no, blue sky's gone forever. Identify with the clouds. Faith in so many ways is knowing that the clouds are clouds.
Yeah, absolutely. So take me back to your I want to hear the end of your the end. It's a constant process that is never ending. But up to where you kind of came back to New York, and started properly getting in back in the acting world again. I want to hear what happened before then.
I was having, I was teaching, I was back sort of in love with life and exploring God again in this way, and exploring myself and beginning to meditate. I, through another crazy serendipitous thing, I found this Jewish meditation teacher who's living in Jerusalem, and I was going to go study with him. And it was crazy. The way I found him was I had come across him online and was like all ready to, just show up in Jerusalem and knock on his door. And it turns out that he is friends with my old kindergarten teacher who was teaching with at the school.
Wow.
Crazy. Just this wild, like,
All world.
insane. I mean, like, you can't make it up, and how insane that is. So I was finished teaching, and I was getting moved to Jerusalem. And during that period where I was, back into Ramdas and doing my, smoking rituals and all that, I left acting formally.
Mm.
I called my reps and I said, I, I'm gonna stop acting for a while, and I need to let go. And I ended those relationships. And the feeling that I had in that moment was like this discovery of who I am, and this constant exploration of it was becoming so, like, I just felt so much joy in that realm. And I would get an audition through, and I would feel like, oh, God.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if I'm feeling that way, if I feel like it's a distraction from this thing that I'm discovering, um, why am I doing it? And the real thing that it came down to was Mikey the actor was like my ultimate identity.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, I was like, if I can let go of this, I think I can let go of anything. And
Because I think we have, from what I know about you, and there's a lot I don't know, but I think we have quite similar trajectories. You acted from quite a young age, right?
I did.
Yeah.
And then I really started taking it seriously when I was like 17. But
Yeah. Yeah. I was sort of similar. I started at 6, but it was
yeah,
sort of 16-ish that I finally decided I was going to do it as a career. And I think actually we have a lot of similarities in terms of I completely relate to the identity as an actor, and it's still something I struggle with today. And also the getting to drama school, and I think we both have personalities of working ourselves to the absolute bone, because this is our everything. This is, it ended for me with a nervous breakdown that led to me leaving drama school, and then that was the ultimate failure, because I had failed. And I I want to ask you how easy was it, or difficult was it, to let acting go? Because when that's been your identity for such a long time, there's moments where I've thought of stepping away, and I just can't. And I think it's less. I'm in a place now, thankfully, where it's less about identity and more about a positive voice within me that tells me that this is what I in some way am meant to do. But how for you, when you're at a stage where that for your whole life almost until um you've left drama school and all that has been your identity, how difficult was it to just let it go?
it was the hardest
Mm,
thing I've ever done in my life, personally.
yeah.
Those two phone calls to my reps were like uh, painful in a way that was I couldn't anticipate.
Mm,
And it was painful in ways because as well, I mean, like what I was letting go of in that moment was not only what I thought of myself, but what all my friends thought of myself, all my family thought of who
Yeah.
I am.
That's the thing. We get to LAMDA and we're surrounded by other actors, and but to everyone in our life, we're Dan the actor, Mikey the actor. It's
Literally, you know,
yeah.
oh, it's gonna
Oh,
be
the
that.
drama kid. Yeah.
And then to say, I mean, it is the ultimate societal feeling of failure.
Mm.
All of a sudden, I remember once when I was at LAMDA, they said something like, 5 years from now, only 5 out of the 30 of you are going to be actors. And I remember thinking that moment, like, there's no way that it wasn't even like an ego thing of like, that's not going to be me. It was like a soul thing of that won't be me because this is it for me.
Yeah.
And to get to the point where 2 years out of drama school, I was letting
Yeah.
go of it. And I
Yeah.
mean, for me, I was letting go of it because I discovered something that was like, I didn't think was possible. I discovered something that felt more meaningful
Mm.
than that. People only see, oh, it must have been too hard. He must have not been able to cut it. And even if that was true, that feeling of people thinking that, feeling like it can be unbearable.
Yeah.
So I have so much, having left it behind, I have so much respect for anyone who's even entertaining that question.
Me too. And I have always said that. And I actually, one of the first blog posts I wrote on the website for this podcast said it, and I truly believe this. I don't believe anyone quits acting. It's almost like you're either forced out, it's kind of like you're pushed out just because it's just becoming unbearable, or it's the right time. I don't believe anyone that can survive a year in this industry will face more rejection than most people have faced in their entire life. So you're not a failure. You've made a decision for your own health.
And I honestly like what I'm kind of I was so excited to get to share this with you today because like the way it turned out, I find very hopeful, and I hope other people do. I mean, I stepped away entirely. I like said nope. I tried to let go of this thing that was everything to me, and I approached it as though I would never act again.
Hmm.
That was the relationship I took to it in my mind. I said, I'm not doing this. I'm going to act as though my life as Mikey the actor is done. And that was unbelievably painful. What it also created was by letting go of the thing that was the closest aspect of my identity. I had space then. I was like, anything is possible now. I've let go of this thing. I can, anything is possible. I can finally, for now, I always had this dream of like going and working on a ship for like 2 years. But I was like, how am I ever going to do that if I'm an actor? I can't go and just like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
suddenly I was like, I can do anything. I can move to anywhere in the world I want. I can go be a volunteer. I can go do this, that. So this teacher comes into my life and I'm going to go move to Jerusalem and study meditation. That was going to be my life. And my friends, my family, everyone was worried about me. I was happier than I'd ever been. And the people around me were like, oh, Mikey lost it. Mikey.
He's finally gone insane.
Yeah, literally, that was the thing. And I mean, I think my friends in London, who I haven't seen in a long time, I think they still do think that. I, you know, I, and that is also one of the difficulties when you approach a relationship to God is it's often met with like, "Ooh, something must have happened," because that's just so irrational, so illogical, all those things. But um, I think God is the most simple thing that I've ever encountered, and also the most personal, universal, beautiful thing. So anyway, I'm going to Jerusalem. That's the plan. But still there's COVID regulations, so I can't go until September or August rather. So I decided to move to a fruit farm in California that was on a spiritual commune, and I go live there, and I'm harvesting fruit for a month and meditating. So I did that, and
Whereabouts in California?
I was up in Northern California in Sonoma County, so on the
Oh,
coast. Very
oh.
beautiful.
Yeah, I have. I North California is. I've seen quite a lot of Southern California, but I've heard the North is beautiful.
Yes, it's my favorite, man. It's so beautiful, Northern California. Special place. It's like you're in Tuscany, you know. I was up there, and then my flight got canceled. COVID regulation had to be moved to September, so I stayed for another month. And I was just like it was like meditation boot camp for me. I was there for 2 months and had no other obligations other than picking fruit and meditating. So I was like, it was hard work, but it was great.
Hmm.
Um, then my flight gets canceled again, more COVID regulations. So I decided to go. I have to leave the farm. I go to Oregon for a month, and then I leave Oregon, and I have to go back to Chicago. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to save some money, and I'm going to leave in January. But when I left the farm and I went to Oregon. This is in like October 2021. I I was like, okay, before I go to Israel, like let me open the door. And until then, I was holding. I was like, Israel's where I'm going. And I went, all right, I'm going to open the door. Is that where I need to go? And even asking myself that question after the vulnerability of leaving acting, to then go, okay, I'm going to open the door again.
Hmm.
Do I really want to go to Israel still? Do I want to go study with this teacher in this way? Like, is that what I want? Pain, unbelievable. Like, all right, I'm going to ask again. Maybe that's not it. And I entertained every idea. I was like, maybe I'll move to Hawaii. Maybe I'll move here. Maybe I'll do this, do that. I was really committed to living like I was looking at moving into an ashram or moving into a monastery and becoming a Hindu monk. I was like
Yeah.
interested in committing to a spiritual life. Um, and there was this voice, this feeling deep in my chest, back of my head, that said, what about moving back to New York and acting again? And it said, I wouldn't let myself look at it. And then I started to be like, okay, what if that's a possibility? Do I really want that? And at first I would look at it and I'd say, no, that's all ego. I can't go do that. That's just for selfish reasons. It's not for anything pure. Nope, nope, nope. Again, more resistance, more phony holiness.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was actually thinking that voice is actually the ego. It's.
Exactly. That is the ego saying that. The one that, and I was like, nope, couldn't look at it, couldn't look at it. And as soon as I like softened and allowed myself to be with it, it was like, man, going anywhere else, going to Israel, going to Hawaii, going anywhere else, feels like I'm avoiding the pain of feeling naked as an actor in New York, which feels like where I need to be.
Hmm.
And it was like heart wrenching almost to accept that because I didn't want that. I didn't want to go back and go through the humiliation and the feeling of like struggle and having to face that I haven't made it, that I haven't, gotten to those places that I dreamed about when I was in drama school yet. All those things. I don't want to do that. But it was undeniable again, an undeniable one that was like, this is where you're really being called to. This is what you're really being called to do. And somewhere in you, this is really what you want to do. I couldn't.
Sounds like we have that same voice, like I said earlier. Yeah, you know.
And it's wild, and so uh, again, in the way that the universe conspires, I truly believe conspires to serve you and help you. Um, Mid-January, I was like, okay, I'm gonna move to New York. I was like, I'm gonna do this. Second I did that, I called Scott on the phone and told him. He was like, I knew you were gonna tell me that just now. I felt it. And he was like, so crazy. Shelby just posted on Instagram that she's looking for a roommate like an hour ago. So Shelby's someone we go to school with, and
She will be on the podcast very soon.
yes, she will. And um, I get in touch with Shelby, and I have an apartment, an hour after deciding to move back to New York, right? Like, okay, there we go. I get back here, a job falls into my lap right away. Like it was just this like I start talking to Shelby, and I had just been, a monk for a year. And I'm back in the fucking city, and I'm back doing this thing, and Shelby and I are driving the car, we're like moving stuff from our old place, and somehow the conversation of meditation gets brought up, and I'm like, oh, do you meditate? She's like hesitantly, and I'm just like, yeah. And I was like, oh, what kind of meditation do you practice? And she was like, non-duality. And I was like, that's literally the thing that I practice. And so it's just this beautiful, like, clear that, okay, I'm supposed to be in the right place. But I get back here, and here I am now. I have no representation. My managers didn't want anything to do with me when I got back. And to no fault of their own, I, vanished. I have no representation. I haven't been in anything professionally, you know. And I go from like all of my ego from before, after I graduated, auditioning for cool things, to submitting myself on backstage for unpaid plays in church basements, and that was the most humbling experience as an artist, because what came from me doing that was like the most beautiful year of acting I've ever had. I fucking swallowed, I had to go through all the feeling of like, oh man, all my friends are doing these cool things, and I could have been doing it and all that. And I then was like, all right, I'm just going to submit myself for shit, and started doing it. And I got to join this unbelievable Shakespeare company in the city, unpaid, but the best group of people ever. And I, I got to play a dream role with them. And then I submitted myself for another thing, and I booked this awesome role. It was my first paid gig. I got paid, $1,000 for the show. And it was like this amazing thing. It was just, I, I was doing it. I was living the life of like a New York actor. I was hustling. I was working a job 10 to 5, and then taking an hour train to rehearsal until 9 o'clock, and hour train back. And, it was like, but it was so joyful, and it was so much more real than anything. And it didn't fucking matter that I wasn't getting paid, or it wasn't on Broadway. I was discovering things. And what
Can I
I
just say, as you said, it's the most humbling experience, but it's also not just the most humbling experience, but the bravest decision, and also the most admirable from the outside to me, because I had a period last year where I was touring all summer, and I was in a bad headspace, and my bitterness and my feelings of all the same things you talked about. Oh, my friends are doing this and I'm not. All that were all coming back, to the extent that I was doing this amazing production that everyone was enjoying, doing Shakespeare, which I love, and I hated every minute of it. And I have had to step away from acting. I'm going to be in a play in a month or so, but I've basically stepped away for acting for 8 months because I wanted to get the love back, and I feel I have. And to hear you say that you've got it back, and actually this is a just as joyful experience as it would be if you were on Broadway, whatever, you know, it's such a fucking hard industry we're in, but that pure joy, no one can take that away from you. And I'm so happy that you've come back to it. And I'm just so amazed at your story, man. I mean, I want to know, sorry to interrupt you, but I had to say that. Um, and I just wanted to like say, what have you taken from all those experiences that you've had in between, you know, from the start of where we talked about to now? What have you brought back with you to, as an actor, and what feels different this time around?
I'll First of all, I'm so glad you said what you said, and really, like, I want to be clear when I say, and I'm so glad I can say this now. Like, if you're an actor and you don't have representation, and you're submitting yourself, like, it is so possible, and it
Mm.
is so beautiful the opportunities that can and do and will come from that. And like to just let go of all the comparisons of how it should look in this moment, because I did one job after, and I was working nonstop last year because I was submitting myself, because I didn't, like, it's so beautiful, man. And you meet people, the opportunities, the community, it builds upon itself in ways that, like, it's just so beautiful. So my message is the same as what you said, which is, first of all, I think it is so fucking brave for any actor to go down that road and do it, because it will lead you to the most glorious places and to places that you can't expect, and um yeah, what I got from it when I came back after all of, that journeying and going away and inner exploration, when I came back to it, I'll remember that I was in this rehearsal room for the first time after being back, and I just had a much wider context for who I was and what I was doing in that room than I ever had before. It was so much less about me proving things and putting on this good performance, and it was much more just about, like, what does it mean to be present in this moment on stage? What does it mean to be present in this rehearsal? What does it mean to serve this story? Like, I was just so much more able to, like, first of all, I was a better actor than I'd ever been beforehand. In a very tangible way. I was like, man, this is what my teachers were talking about when they were like, we've just been waiting for you to be able to trust yourself. Suddenly it was like there's so much less at stake. My ego wasn't on the line in not every performance, every rehearsal.
Mm.
My ego wasn't on the line. It was like I can come in with a stain on my shirt. Metaphorically, it's like, and I can just be here and actually discover. I felt like I actually had room to do what it is that an actor does, which is be in a space without any worry about what does the director think, what is this, it's like, and those things still come up and came up and all of that, but like, no, there was just so much more space for something real to happen, both in performance and in rehearsal. And I had much more ability to just be present with what was going on, than constantly be in the future of, is this getting me closer towards making it?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm balancing now as I continue my acting career. Like, those things come up still, and it isn't that now I'm just this serene act. It's not at all. I mean, like, I have days where I'm in rehearsals and I'm an anxious, pleasing, desperate mess. But the beauty of a life of meditation is that, like, that, as we said, that doesn't go away. Your relationship to that changes, so you can notice it as it's happening, just maybe a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
Laugh at it.
It was so interesting because I've come a long way, but I have such a long way to go with that acting being a part of my identity and my ego and feeling like a failure and all those things. And it was interesting. I'm back in the UK now, but I was, as you know, in America for a few weeks, and I was staying in Vermont with the wonderful Jana Keel, and she got a self-tape through. And this hadn't happened for me in a long time, but immediately this, like, that I'm a failure, which then turns to fear and anger, which I believe anger is a form of fear, came back up. And it so took me off guard because it hadn't happened in so long. I'm like, oh, it's still there. It's like, but you know, I could witness it at least.
That's so, I'm so, first of all, Dan, like for you to have the ability to say that and like share that, I think is just the most beautiful thing ever. Because that's what really is required of us, is that level of honesty, you know, and that's what LAMDA has. And yeah, I mean, I'm the same exact way. Like these feelings, these fears, these jealousies, you know, oh my God, one of the most, talk about one of the most uncomfortable feelings in the world. How about being jealous of your friend's successes?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm.
You want to get into
Yeah.
some
Someone
confusing,
you love so much that, yeah.
and all of a sudden you see them doing things and you're like, fuck. And that's just a wild, I don't, you know, I imagine others experience it. I do. I mean, I can speak for myself. I experienced it and experience it still often. As again, the beauty of having like a relationship with your mind, which isn't total identification with every thought and feeling, is that like jealousy can arise, and you can, one, not judge it for being, you know, jealous, far out.
Mm.
Wow.
I think this is such an important conversation for any artist to have, but especially actors. I feel like we need, and this is one thing that I struck me as so beautiful in New York, staying with you guys and seeing you do the play reading, was it felt like you were actively trying to build a community and create work for the sake of creating work. And there is community in the London acting scene, but it was, I'd never seen something like that. And I think part of building a community and looking after each other as actors is having these honest conversations and saying these are not abnormal feelings for humans doing this crazy fucking shit thing that we're doing, you know, this crazy shit that we're doing and trying to pursue. It's not abnormal to have these feelings. It doesn't make you a bad fucking person.
And yeah, perfectly said. One and two, I think you're absolutely right. This is the important conversation to have, because it's like all the shame and confusion that's wrapped up in it. It's just so horrible. I mean, it's what, again, it's for those of you interested in a spiritual way, some of these things. I mean, that's what Ramdas does so beautifully. Is like he uses himself and his getting caught and being attached and being angry as the example so often that when I heard him talk about things like that, I went, "Oh my God!" So it's okay. That's okay. It's okay for me to be feeling these things, being confused in this way, being angry, you know, jealous, all these things. Like he just made those by owning them and being okay with them, being honest about them, and not pretending that they don't exist. Well, who are we pretending for? Who are we pretending for? You know, and I still want to be on Broadway. I still want to have the success and the recognition in my career
Same.
that's okay too. You know, and that's
Yeah.
not the third part of it. Is like the fact that I still want those things is okay. And
Mm.
what's important for us in our own happiness is being okay with like not being there yet, not feeling contrary, feeling contradictory. Like it's like the being okay with all of it. I want it. I'm not there. I all of those things. And like when you allow each of them to exist, it's like suddenly there's space in you available for being okay with just where you are right now, and not in a way that's like settling, or not in a way that's like it's like
And that space
yeah,
will make you a better creative and a better actor.
one 1000%. If you have a second agenda going on the whole time you're acting, which is this, which I did for a very long time, which is
Me
this,
too.
how do I show them who I am, or how do I prove, how do I get there? That is running as you are doing your thing, as you're performing, as you're working in a rehearsal. As long as that's running, it's just eating so much of your energy that could be spent really towards just being present with what's happening in a way that is like, presence is the ingredient for discovery, deep, deep discovery, and deep joy and laughter and surrender, all of it, and
Yeah.
and it's like you gotta just surrender the need for it to be for anything else. And again, oddly enough, it's like when you accept your ego is when it starts to loosen its grip. It's I find it similar in acting. Like when you accept where you are, when you accept who you are, and just accept the work for what it is, it's like suddenly you're doing something profound and different than you've ever done it. But the caveat is it's now out of your control. You don't own it anymore, and you don't get to choose. It's like, as Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan know, it's coming through you, right? They're not writing, you're not writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
You're
like,
getting out of your own way.
exactly.
It's a practice in getting out of your own way. We're going to go on to the segments of the week, but I'm going to do it a little differently this time because I think, and you can choose more than one in each, because I think this is an important conversation that I don't get to have with many people often about the sort of spirituality and meditation and these things. So I'm going to go through the questions and we'll try and figure out, you can answer them as they are, or we'll figure out a way to kind of make them a hybrid for this episode. So I usually ask art of the week, a piece of art you've seen, listened to, whatever this week that has moved you. But we can also do a piece of I don't know, literature or a talk or something like that changed you, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's what are the balls in your court, Mikey.
Appreciate the past, man. That's love it. Um, that's beautiful. Yeah, I have one for both actually now. I think I art of the week. Just last night I saw Naomi Asaturyan, who is a fellow LAMDA grad. Um, she put on. She was a part of the Lighthouse series at Soho Playhouse, um, which basically shows like a portion of a new play from a series of uh, emerging playwrights and actors, and hers was selected, and it was just so beautiful, um, honest, and uh, present in both her performance and in her writing of it in a way that was really special. Um, so yeah, Naomi had a really, she has as a performer a really beautiful capacity for what I guess I would call surrender, being alive to the present, the magic of the present moment, which is like when you can do that, that weird shit happens. You know what I mean? Like you get a bit weird with your body, with your in a way where to me that is like the highest compliment, which is like as an audience, it's intoxicating and it's thrilling. And she really allows herself to go to that space of like, if I feel something, I'm gonna just I'm gonna allow it to exist and express itself. So her writing was tremendous. It's a place called Magma. Hopefully, we're going to be seeing more of it. And she did a beautiful job telling the story as an actress as well. That's my.
Great to
That's my.
hear. Great to hear us an art of the week that's a fellow LAMDA grad as well.
No, it was joyful. It was, yeah, really, really special. So shout out to Naomi Asaturyan, Naomi Asa on Instagram. She's amazing. Um, uh, a piece of the week that has been impactful for me. I was just listening to one before our conversation, which is this Ram Dass podcast called The Emptiness of Compassion. It's episode 163 of the Here and Now with Ram Dass podcast. And the podcast is amazing. It's a compilation of lectures of his from 1967 through 2019 when he died. So it's just like, it's a glorious archive. But yeah, this one is from 1989, and it's one that was really special to me when I first heard it 2 years ago. I remembered hearing this one specifically. And by chance, it was the one I played today before our talk. And he discusses in it a lot around behind all the stuff of life, here we are. And life can be kind of horrifying sometimes. It can be grisly, it can be dark, it can be hard. And that's something not to shy away from, and important not to shy away from when talking about God. I feel is that life is dark as well. There's darkness. There's difficulty. Talk about having a trusting relationship with the universe. Part of that is trusting that even when it's a bit ugly, that there is something to be gleaned from this, or it is a preparation or a purging or anything, right? And that doesn't, and I think sometimes people see that as spiritual bypassing, right? But I don't mean it in that way. What I mean by that is like, it can be ugly and hard. Me losing my grandfather, someone I loved so much, and in such a horrible way, right? Coma from COVID.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing it as like a preparation for a future event, or like some sort of thing like that, it's an opportunity when you live in a trusting in relationship with the universe or God, or live in a spiritual context. I find it's the one that I live in. It's an opportunity to feel all the fucking horrible feelings of grief and to feel them fully without resistance. And the trust comes, okay, I'm going to feel this fully. And at times I'm not going to feel it fully. I'm going to be hiding from it. And at times I'm going to be dancing around it. But actually, this opportunity to feel it fully is grace, in the sense that I will then be peaceful with something that is unimaginably difficult. Nearby Star is a teacher I'd love to shout out here. She's a really beautiful, brilliant spiritual teacher, often teaching on the divine feminine. And she published a translation of The Dark Night of the Soul, which is a really beautiful Christian mystical poem. It's a term we all know, the dark night of the soul. But it is just this. It is when we no longer feel our connection to the physical world, but our connection to God goes away as well. And we go through a period of this in between where it's just darkness. Mm-hmm. And she wrote this translation of it, and the day it was published, her 14-year-old daughter died in a car accident. And her story of that grief that she went through and continues to explore. It's like when I talk about these things, I don't talk about them in like this, like it's a new way to be ignorant, or a way to bypass things. I mean, the beauty of it is that Mirabai Star was living a spiritual life, had the unimaginable happen to her, and then that spiritual life supported her through that, and in a way that wasn't false or running away. It was, okay, because I have this, I can dive head in. The greatest tragedy of all, a parent losing a child.
Yeah. Unimaginable.
Unimaginable. And And then through that, she learned more and felt more and was able to connect to her daughter in a deeper, it's so beautiful. So this podcast, The Emptiness of Compassion, speaks a lot about meeting each other behind the sorrow or through the sorrow. And I highly recommend it. And there's some just beautiful, you know, humor and lightness and beauty.
Amazing.
Piece of it.
Right. So my art of the week. So my art of the week is I talk a lot with my co-host Lewis Shepherd about what makes a great pop song, because there are some great pop songs out there.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
And an old banger, which is that I've been re-listening to this week, is it's Drops of Jupiter by Train with Tell Me, did you sail across the sun? That one.
Oh, yes.
Oh, and I've been listening to that on repeat, and I'm like, that's how you write a pop song.
So beautiful. By the way, just maybe a conversation for another time. I so agree. I think there's some gorgeous pop music out there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm gonna go for, it's not really a piece of the week, but it's just a kind of recommendation for anyone out there who is maybe has done a bit of meditation or is looking to kind of further their meditation practice. The app Waking Up, which is Sam Harris's app, and has been absolutely life-changing for me. Kind of was one of the first things that introduced me to non-dual meditation and non-duality. And the great thing about this app is that it has conversations, it has different series with different practitioners, it has the whole of every recorded interview and talk that Alan Watts ever gave.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic resource with some wonderful teachers on there. So I'm going to recommend that. Mikey, who is your artist spotlight of the week, or some teachers or something that you would recommend?
Uh, I think maybe Naomi is my artist spotlight of the
Great.
week.
Mm-hmm.
Also spotlighting a theater company that is in the works here in New York, which is myself and Rose Jackson Smith, another LAMDA grad, and Shelby. We're really getting this thing going in a beautiful way. So we are yet unnamed, but we've been hosting some beautiful readings. So some things to come from there, which I'll be sharing with you soon.
I'm so pleased to hear that, by the way.
Thank you, man. It's been a beautiful experience so far. So excited to see where it goes. But also artist spotlight, Stanley Morgan, who is one of my best friends in the world. It's my brother. He's just doing some amazing things right now in his life. He's working at in some beautiful projects and meeting it with the truth and clarity and intensity that we've always spoken about meeting it. So I just want to commend him for for walking the walk as well as talking the talk, and just doing the thing that we've been dreaming about. And, yeah, he brings a level of himself to all the projects he does in a way that is inspiring to the people around him, not not anything other than that. And so it's beautiful and it's rare. So I always commend him.
Amazing.
But
He's someone I'd love on the podcast, actually. I
I
should
was
reach out to Stan.
I was just about to say, man, you should definitely get him on because that'd be a beautiful conversation. Um, uh, yeah, and then some teachers I'd love to highlight. I mean, Ram Dass is kind of the theme of this one. I can't stress enough that his work changed my life, has changed countless people's lives, and it's so accessible. And if any part of you, when you heard this, was like kind of perked up a bit, I just recommend following that intuition and giving him a check out because, yeah, it's a journey that is something I so highly recommend. Um, other teachers, Divarshi, Stephen Hartman. He's my mentor in life. Been a part of my life since before I was born. A really special human being, and a really brilliant yoga teacher, life coach. So if you're ever looking for anything, any sort of guidance, any help with getting things going in your life, or you're looking for some spiritual teaching, Divarshi is a great source. I'll send you a link if you want to link it.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll share that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you. My artist spotlight of the week is a musician called Andrea von Kampen. I saw her when I was staying with you, actually. I went to see the tallest man on earth, who's one of my favorite musicians, at the Bowery Ballroom in New York City. And she was supporting, and I'd never heard of her before. And she's a beautiful folk musician with a stunning voice, fantastic songs. One I'd recommend would be Portland is a great song. She also does some fantastic covers of some traditional folk songs. So Andrea von Kampen. Uh, and I'm going to highlight three teachers, I think. I'm going to be greedy. Um, I'm going to go for, first of all, Ajahn Chah, who is sadly long past, but was an instrumental figure in the Thai forest tradition, Theravada Buddhism, and he was one of the main, what not one of the influences of bringing Buddhism to the West in sort of the 60s and 70s. And unfortunately, he didn't speak English, so it's all translated, but it doesn't lose its power. His teachings. So I would recommend him. I would also recommend Ajahn Sumedho, who is still alive, an American monk who was under the guidance of Ajahn Chah. Is an amazing man to listen to, and all his stuff is on YouTube. They do, I think it's Siddha Viveka Monastery here, which Ajahn Chah and him built. Their YouTube channel, he does like a weekly thing and just a talk on something, and he's a very influential teacher to me. And I haven't met him yet. I've stayed at that monastery, but he'd gone to Thailand that week, which annoyed me. But hey, there we are. And I was going to choose a third, but I can't remember where my brain was going with that. So I'll say Alan Watts, because he's just, as an orator, if nothing else, just stunning.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing you are grateful for this week, Mikey?
Wow. This week I'm grateful for patience this week. I'm grateful for this growing sense of patience I've been feeling, which is helping me to loosen up around some places I was holding. And I think that were it not for a sense of patience, I may have reacted from a place of tension and holding. And just like I've been noticing, like allowing myself to watch a lot of my feelings rather than react from them, and rather than repress them, it's offering me an opportunity recently to see them transform. Um, so I'm grateful for patience in the people in my life, my teachers and my friends, Shelby, who really support me being patient. So
That's
uh,
fantastic. And you know, such a great tool in the industry we're in and the life we are choosing for ourselves.
true.
Mm. I am grateful this week for the the new perspectives I find when I travel, especially when I travel on my own. I've just come back from a 3-week trip to America, and it shows me, it opens new possibilities and shows me new perspectives that widen my world a little bit. And the main thing here is that I found out on this trip something about the tuition is currently free at Yale. For all tuition is free. And I am fairly certain already, actually, having thought about it for at first, it was kind of a, oh, well, maybe. I think I'm going to audition in January for the MFA at Yale. So, and I wouldn't have found out about that if I hadn't met old friends when I was in New York. And I also realized this, how much I didn't, you don't realize how much you miss people until that you haven't seen in years until you see them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so true. That's beautiful to hear as well. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. So that's what I'm grateful for. If there is one thing you could change about the industry, Mikey, what would it be?
Specifically related to theater, I would change, and I'm hoping to change the relationship to the output of theater as product rather than process-driven work. I would love to see actors have an opportunity to rehearse for 7 weeks as opposed to 3 weeks. I'd love to see shows have an opportunity to live for years rather than a few months, live alongside, a repertory of other things. So my real dream for the industry is that there's some way in the West here where we can inject some sort of space into the work and an ability for actors to be supported through that space, where they can really feel like this is their job, this is what they do, and that they have an opportunity to explore without the pressure of, okay, I have 3 weeks to rehearse this show, then it goes up, and while it's going up, that's my audition for the next job.
Yeah.
My dream is like, we're gonna have time to really let our focus be, once again, how do we tell this story in the way that creates something, beyond ourselves. That's my dream. More time for us all to sink into these things.
I think that's a fantastic dream. And I think part of what that is going to take is a shift in Western culture. Not all Western cultures, Germany's quite good at it, but is governments and societies at large seeing art as the social tool that it can be?
Completely.
Yeah. Is that, if you don't have to choose one, but narrowing it down to one's often quite good, is there an artistic role model that you've had in life? It can be a famous artist, or it can be someone who has just inspired you.
Yeah, I will say, I've got two I want to mention, but the one that I really want to mention right now is Lev Dodin. Lev Dodin is the artistic director of the Mali Drama Theater in St. Petersburg, Russia. And Lev is this tremendous example of what it was we were just talking about. And I mean, it functions as a result of the way that Russia has supported their work there, in the sense that, it's government subsidized, so they have living wages guaranteed. But Lev really is like a pioneer of these insanely long rehearsal processes. And the Mali Drama Theater it's the best theater I've ever seen, probably. But at any given time, the company has 36 plays in repertory.
Wow.
And like, so a month at the Mali Drama Theater, like a month in their season is 15 different plays. Jeez. So one night it's this, another night it's that, like, and it's just like, what a dream as an actor. you know, and when you join, you join for life, you know. So it's like you're just like a part of this company. And that's your home. That you have a theatrical home. And so I really want to shout out Lev Doden. He's a master. He's a beautiful human being from what I hear, and he's created an environment that has produced some of the best work I've ever seen, and it's produced that because the actors have the space to explore a story for a year before it has to be open to the public. Yeah, so Mali Drama Theater. But the other person I just want to shout out is Brian McManaman, longtime teacher of mine and director of mine and coach. He's here in New York. And what he brings to the work is, you know, I've often said it's like, you know, it feels like you're training with Lee Strasberg or something in the scope of how meaningful the work is. He really like endeavors to bring out your natural wonder again.
Such
and
a
remind
gift.
it's there, and it's very spiritual. And the result of the work is so, you know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So watching the people in his classes work, it's like you see how it works. So Brian McManaman, if you happen to be listening in New York, is someone I without hesitation recommend.
Amazing. And finally, Michael Defilippis, what does it mean to you to be an artist?
It means to me having a talent slash and inclination towards that talent, whether that's acting or painting, ceramics, you know, whatever it is. You have some level of skill that, and in some inclination towards that skill, right? That sort of beyond concepts, beyond conceptual reasoning, you feel driven to practice this craft. And to be an artist then is to allow nature to work, right? You being a part of nature, this inclination within you being a part of nature, allowing that to work and creating space for a wider inspiration to use that talent that is living in you and through you to be expressed. So for me, being an artist is allowing and living your natural inclination, and then making space for God to use that in a way that both brings you joy and brings something into the world that has never existed and is perhaps quite meaningful for others to witness.
Mikey, thank you for being such a open, honest, kind, empathetic, and lovely human being, and thank you for coming on. It's a strange one. We haven't actually spent that much time together in our lives, but I feel very connected to you and very at ease with you. So thank you.
I really appreciate that, Dan, and I feel the exact same way. And I'm, I said before, extremely grateful for this opportunity to be here with you. You know, you're a beautiful host. So, so many podcasts and in the future.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back on. I'd love to have you back on at a later date.
One thing we didn't discuss that I wanna touch base on when it comes to God. So maybe at another time we can.
Absolutely, we'll do a whole podcast on it. Amazing. Thanks, buddy.